Hello and welcome to Camp Kaiju Monster Movie Reviews. Tonight we are joined by a very special guest host, and Frank here is going to help us talk about Rodan, Ishiro Honda's 1956 kaiju film from Toho. We're so excited to talk about this movie. So yeah, I'll let everyone else introduce themselves. Take it away, you guys.
I'm Matt Levine. I've been on the show numerous times before. Very excited to talk about Rodan, and also want to welcome Frank, our very special guest tonight. Thanks for joining us, Frank.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me on. I'm excited to talk about Rodan, which I consider to be, not to give away the part at the end where we give our ratings and everything, but I consider this to be, if not equal to, then at least like the 1B to like Godzilla and King Kong as far as giant monster movies go, and doesn't get the love that it deserves. So it's time to put some respect on Rodan's name.
I think that is so well put. Okay. Let's not talk about the end right now, because I was also about to just tell you how I feel about it. Yeah, so before we get into the synopsis and the production history, everybody, just want to say thank you for your support. Thank you for listening. You can follow us on the social medias. You can follow us wherever you podcast. We just are really grateful for your support and for enjoying Kaiju Lai all month long. We've been talking about classic kaiju films, mostly from Toho, and this is the capper of the month. So I think it's a good one to end Kaiju Lai on for this year.
Yeah, what a capper it is, indeed.
Do people say that? A capper? That felt weird, but we roll with it.
We'll bring it back.
So Matt, should we go into the synopsis, or should we talk about our personal histories with this film?
Well, Frank, maybe I'll turn it over to you. And if you have a personal history with the film and like want to introduce yourself a little bit and like your sort of film background, you're more than welcome to. So yeah, I'll let you do that if you would like to.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as far as my film background, I'm just, former film studies major, went to college with Matt and everything for some of that, which has, prepared me for a career in telesales, selling welding supplies and safety supplies to businesses. So
I can relate to that.
Yeah. As far as my background with the movie goes, though, I actually, as far as kaiju movies go, I hadn't seen really a ton until a few years ago. Of course, I'd seen like Godzilla and some of the like big classics that kind of everyone's seen, but so Matt and I are in a Facebook movie group as well, where just people kind of post about what movies they've watched recently and things like that. And there's one guy in that group with us who I don't know personally, but he seems like a good guy from the group, named Todd Temperley. And he would always post about these kaiju movies. And one time several years ago, back around Halloween, Turner Classic Movies was showing a bunch of kaiju movies. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to have time to like watch every one of these, but like, I'm going to ask this Todd guy, like, which are the ones I have to see. And he kind of gave me a list, and out of those I picked, I don't know, 6 or 7 or whatever that I DVR'd. And of those, Rodan was definitely my favorite of the ones that I watched. I just thought it was really compelling for reasons that we'll get into here. And it just really stuck with me. So when you guys gave me the invite to come on, it was one of the first things I thought of, and I thought, well, surely you guys have already done an episode on this one, and you hadn't when I looked through the archives. So it was like, great, it's Rodan, let's do it.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Frank. Can I ask, what were some of the other movies that you DVR'd?
I know, let's see, I think that's when I saw Mothra for the first time as well, and Godzilla versus Mothra. I don't, I might be butchering the title of this one, but I think it's Godzilla, or no, it's like Invasion of Zero Monster or something. It's the one where it's like Godzilla does the like dance after he
yeah
after he attacks someone. That one is very silly, but it's entertaining. And that one, I happened to see the version that they showed on Turner Classic Movies was the like American dubbed version. And I don't remember off the top of my head the name of the one American actor in it, but it's one of the like worst / best performances.
Yeah, I think his
I've
name is
ever seen
Nick.
him.
I think his name is Nick Adams, and he was in a
Okay, yeah, that
couple.
sounds right. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
I remember there's a part, there's a couple just like hilarious moments in that movie. Like there's one where he well, a couple of times he calls Godzilla Godzilla, which is good first of all. And I remember there's a part at the end of that movie, uh, not to spoil anything for anyone who hasn't seen it, but it's something, and I don't even remember it clearly enough to spoil it anyway, I guess. But there's something where they um like name him like president of whatever the planet in the movie is supposed to be or something, and then he goes, "Whatever's fair, pal." I just thought those are, brilliant line reading, no
that's.
notes, just perfect. Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've seen that. Invasion of Astro Monster, which
Okay.
also,
Yes.
yeah, which also features Rodan in
Yeah.
another major
Yeah.
Godzilla movie.
Yeah. And Destroy All Monsters was in that bunch too, which I really enjoy that one. I think that's maybe the most like purely fun of the kaiju movies I've seen.
Yeah, that one's just a kaiju fest. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I was disappointed though, because so one of the kaiju in that movie is Manda, the
Yeah,
giant
yeah.
snake. Yeah, and that was, I thought, the coolest one in that movie, because I remember there's the great scene in that movie that's just like the montage of, I think it's supposed to be like news footage of the various kaiju like attacking different kind of world monuments. And Manda, I think, is slithering through like London, I think,
Yeah,
in that
so
part.
it's like wrapping itself around like an elevated train track or something.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I remember too. And yeah, and I was like, oh, this is like the coolest one. I've got to know more. And again, I went back to that Todd guy in that movie group we're in, and he said, oh yeah, Manda was in this movie, Atragon.
Yep.
So then for a couple of years after that, I was like, oh, I've got to see Atragon. And then last year I watched it. I found out it was on, and I don't know if it still is at this point, but I think it was on Vudu or Tubi, one of
To
those
be
ones where you can
probably.
watch stuff for free with ads.
Yeah.
And I watched it, and it's a terrible movie. It's just really, really a bad movie.
That's so
So
interesting you say that. Just because there are many kaiju in Toho's sort of like gallery that never get their own movies, or if they do, it's like a one-shot deal. I feel
yeah,
like with Rodan is really cool, and I'm glad that he has appeared in subsequent films. However, Rodan from 1956 is the monster's only solo outing.
is that right? Yeah, even
Yeah.
I was wondering about that actually. I suppose I should have looked it up or something before we got on to record here. But I was wondering if there were ever any like remakes or reboots of
Nope.
Rodan. And yeah, I
Nope.
wasn't aware of any. So
Rodan is it's called the Big Five, Toho's Big Five: Godzilla, Mothra, Rodan, King Ghidorah, and Mecha Godzilla.
okay.
Even Mothra has had independent movies. Rodan, he's only got 1956, which is so interesting, because the movie is, I think, so rock solid that you would think they would try to remake it at least. So with all that said, my experience with the film, just from the like the past 2 years, honestly, I've seen it 4 times. At least 3 to 4 times in the past 2 years. When I started this podcast, I sought it out as one of those lesser known hidden gems, and it certainly was that. And I just fell in love with it from the moment I watched it, for reasons we'll get into.
Yeah, I would just say that I was introduced to Rodan, I guess, in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. which, you know, he has like kind of a bit part in that, and it's sort of like a little bit silly, as we talked about in the episode a little while ago, as much as I love that movie. But I was not really prepared for how kind of maybe bleak is too strong of a word, but like, yeah, like serious minded this movie is at times. And I really like the, you know, the creature Rodan a lot. And although it's unfortunate that he never really appeared in like his own, or, you know, there are two of them in this film, but like in their own or his own standalone film after this, like I feel like maybe what else could you do with it after this movie? Like I feel like it's hard to improve upon, you know?
That's a good point. Good question. So with that, I'm happy to dive into the synopsis.
Sure.
If you guys are.
Yeah.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
Well, Frank, you're the guest of honor. You can take it away.
All right. Well, in a small mining village near the foothills of Mount Aso, two miners named Goro and Yoshi have gone missing after the mine in which they were working flooded. The men had brawled earlier that day and had some kind of ongoing feud. The mine's safety engineer, Shigeru, descends into the mine to investigate and finds Yoshi's mauled corpse.
A doctor analyzes Yoshi's body and discovers that the cause of death was a number of gashes caused by a sharp object. The miners begin to suspect that Goro killed himself, but two local miners and a policeman are also attacked in the flooded mine shaft, and the wounds suggest that they were slain by whatever killed Yoshi.
That night, Shigeru and his fiancée, Kyo, are attacked at their home by a meganulon, a giant larval insect. The police start hunting the creature, and it kills two men before fleeing into the mine. The dead men's injuries suggest that the larval insect creature also committed the earlier killings. Shigeru, along with some soldiers and police officers, descend into the mine and discover Goro's corpse, then are chased by the insect monster.
Shigeru crushes the monster with a runaway minecart, but soon a second giant larva appears. The tunnel caves in, trapping Shigeru in the mine. A doctor named Kashuagi identifies the monster as a meganeuron, an ancient species of dragonfly larva. An earthquake strikes the area, and people begin to believe that the volcanic Mount Aso will soon erupt.
The police discover that the road into the mine has been blocked by damage from the earthquake, but also find an amnesiac. They also find Shigeru with amnesia, wandering around the area. As he tries to recover his memory, a nearby airbase in Kyushu receives a report from a fighter pilot that a UFO is performing impossible aerial feats at supersonic speeds in the area of Mount Aso. The flying object soon overtakes the fighter pilot, destroying his plane and killing him. The airbase gets word that planes in Okinawa, the Philippines, and Beijing were taken down in a similar fashion.
Meanwhile, a married couple has gone missing near Mount Aso. When the police investigate the married couple's photographs from their camera, they discover a massive wing, which suggests that the flying creature is a pteranodon. Shigeru still has no memory of being trapped in the mine, but when Kyo shows him the eggs that her pet birds have lain, Shigeru suddenly remembers. In the cave, he was surrounded by hordes of meganeuron.
There was also a giant egg in the middle of the cave from which Shigeru watched a massive bird emerge. His amnesia now gone thanks to the traumatic memory, Shigeru heads back into the mine and discovers a piece of the colossal egg. Dr. Kashuagi examines the egg and confirms that it is from a pterosaur, basically like a pterodactyl type creature, which the doctor names Rodan. He also hypothesizes that nuclear bomb testing may have awakened Rodan from its slumber.
Rodan takes flight near Mount Aso and heads toward Kyushu with planes from the Japanese Self-Defense Force hot on its tail. After one of its wings is injured, the monster flies to Fukuoka. Sorry, guys.
Fukuoka?
The monster flies to Fukuoka, laying waste to the city with the windstorms caused by its wings. Suddenly, a second Rodan appears to join its mate. They finish devastating the city and fly back to Mount Aso.
The military comes up with a plan to fire at the base of Mount Aso, burying the two Rodans under the rubble. They do so, instigating a volcanic eruption. The first Rodan's wing is damaged in the lava and volcanic debris. It crash lands into a pit of lava and burns alive. The second Rodan dives into the eruption, apparently unwilling to continue its path of destruction without its mate.
Ooh, yeah. That was great. I just want to mention, or I believe the pronunciation is Meganulon with an L
Mm,
rather than
Uh-huh.
Meganeuron.
I
gotcha.
feel like
Sorry about that.
we should probably apologize to anybody if there's any like Japanese listeners for all the mispronunciations there. I realized as we were reading it, I should have like looked up how to pronounce some of the stuff, but
Yeah, mispronouncing Meganulon is the least of our worries with pronunciation.
yeah.
Just an umbrella sorry for all of that. Yeah. It's a very tragic ending, I think, to this movie. It's it's a very fun movie, but it's pretty bleak, and I think we kind of definitely feel for the Rodan creatures at the end.
Which is what when the first time I watched this movie, I was not prepared for an emotional I cried at the end. What else could I say?
Yeah, it's very touching. I don't, not to get ahead of ourselves too much, but like the end with the Rodan creatures is kind of like paralleled by Shigeru and his fiance Kyo, sort of very sadly and tearfully sort of embracing each other. And I just think it's very unexpected that the movie would kind of draw a parallel between the human characters and the two monster characters, which I think goes a long way in developing a lot of sympathy for them.
Yeah.
Anyway, getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. Sorry.
I just want to talk about who's in this movie. No, that's great. I completely agree. In the role of Shigeru is Kenji Sahara, who I love as a performer. He has appeared in more Godzilla films than any other actor, especially in this time period. If you're well versed in Godzilla films, you will recognize his face. He was also in the Ultra series on Japanese TV around that time as well. Do we want to bounce
like
around?
Ultra Man, like the silver guy?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think, like, as far as I know, that series has had a lot of different iterations on Japanese TV throughout the years. And I'm pretty sure Kenji Sahara has been on numerous different versions of that series from like the 60s all the way up through like the 2000s. So he's been on that TV show for several decades, as far as I know. I've never actually seen it myself, but I would very much want to.
I have the first season on DVD. I haven't gotten through it all yet, but it's fun. It's campy. Just sci-fi monster TV stuff.
Could that make an appearance on a future episode, perhaps?
Maybe. There are Ultraman movies, including one that was just released this summer in Japan called Shin Ultraman. Because Matt, I don't know if you know this, or Frank, Toho is emulating the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They're calling it's nicknamed the Shin Universe. So Shin Godzilla that came out in 2016, they want to integrate Shin Ultraman, Shin Kamen Rider, which is another character in that realm, as well as Neon Genesis, Evangelion. How do you say it?
Evangelion, yeah.
Yeah. So all individually loved franchises. Toho is bringing them all together.
Huh. I have a feeling I would prefer the Toho cinematic universe to the Marvel cinematic universe, but that's probably a conversation for another time.
Well, we'll get there.
Yeah.
If either one of you guys want to jump in with cast and crew, that's cool too.
Yeah, so the movie also features Yumi Shirakawa as Kyo. She was dubbed the Japanese Grace Kelly and starred in Yasujiro Ozu's film The End of Summer, as well as several other kaiju movies for Toho.
Is that part of the Ozu cinematic universe?
It is, yes. A very different kind of universe.
We have Akihiko Hirata as Dr. Kashuagi. He starred as the troubled Dr. Serizawa in the original Godzilla and proceeded to star then in over 20 sci-fi and fantasy films for Toho. So another veteran there.
Well, here's an interesting factoid. And I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of the name, but Haruo Nakajima plays Rodan. He's the man in the suit, and he also did suit work as Godzilla in 12 consecutive films, as well as numerous other kaiju. And Toho's visual effects director, IG Subar. Oh my god.
Yeah.
I should have taken this one on. Subaraya considered Nakajima's work invaluable.
Nailed it. Yeah. Nakajima, man, just like when you start, for me, like when I started watching these films as an adult and like understanding that there is a man in the suit playing these monsters, you learn that Nakajima like took the performances really seriously. Like he would study the movement of animals in real life and be like, okay, how can I move like a bear? How can I add this or that to a performance? Which I think sets himself apart from like some other obscure kaiju movies. If you ever win and if you get to them, they're just like dopey guys in monster suits. They're not bringing that same level of craft to it and awareness that Nakajima does. And I think he does a pretty good job as Rodan.
Yeah, I think that's kind of easy to overlook, like the fact that there is a person in the suit most of the time. And I feel like in a way that's kind of like the progenitor of like Andy Serkis and like some of the motion capture performances that have been so like heralded recently, in a way it almost seems to go back to this a little bit.
Absolutely. Making connections.
Yeah, that's what we do.
Another connection is the director, who is Ishiro Honda. He directed the previous films featured on our Kaiju Festival, those being Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, and Terror of Mechagodzilla. This he directed for Toho.
The film was written by Takeo Murata and Takeshi Kimura. In reading up on them a little bit, I found an interesting fact. Takeshi Kimura was a member of the Japanese Communist Party, and his scripts were kind of known for being a little bit more serious, kind of a little more of a downer, more politically minded than some of the other kind of fun, lightweight scripts that some of the other kaiju movies were, might have used throughout the years. But Takeshi Kimura was often known for being a little bit darker, a little more politically minded, which I think comes through in this movie a little bit, not like super overtly, but we can get into that more later.
Yes. Try to remind me, because you mentioning the Communist Party dovetails into something I read about the portrayal of these miners in the very working class miners depicted in the film.
Yeah, that's something I definitely I think we'll talk about that soon, but I think we see it in that. I think the characters that this movie focuses on is a little bit different than the characters that we see pretty often in a lot of other kaiju movies. And maybe I'm thinking a little bit more of like Terror of Mechagodzilla and some of the like campier ones that we've seen recently. But I still feel like it's kind of like a striking contrast a little bit.
Definitely. And then music by Ikiro Ifukube, who I always fall in love with his scores. Is that just me? I don't know.
Definitely one of the MVPs of these Toho era kaiju movies for sure. And this has a particularly good one too. I think particularly good score by him.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like we need to mention him every time because his scores are always fantastic.
They say so much. Like they just add so much character and flavor to the film. Ugh.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll go into the production backstory. Before we do that, I will tell you all about banditsemporium.com, the official t-shirt partner of Camp Kaiju, where you can find monster-inspired t-shirts for great prices, and it's pretty cool. If you buy a t-shirt, you can support this show directly. Part of the proceeds go to us, which is very great when we're hosting guests like Frank. It costs a little bit to host this sort of stuff, so we do appreciate that support. So banditsemporium.com, as they say, we sell shirts. As Camp Kaiju says, Matt, what does Camp Kaiju say?
Camp Kaiju says, we talk monsters.
That's it. That's all you need to know.
Yep.
And may I just say, if you need a shirt that you can wear both on the runway and in the boardroom, the Camp Kaiju shirt is a great choice.
Ooh, there's an endorsement.
That's what we were going for. That's good to hear.
Frank, I'll give you your check for saying that later on, but I appreciate it.
That's part of that cost you were talking about with hosting me.
I'm gonna wear a Camp Kaiju shirt in the boardroom tomorrow and see how it goes. I'll report back to you guys. It may end disastrously. We'll see.
I think you should. Okay, so like we said, this was the first movie to feature Rodan the monster. This was actually, not only was it the first to feature Rodan, it was the second, I believe it was the second of Toho's Kaiju films. It followed Gojira from 1954, and another first. This was Toho's first film in color, I think.
Yeah, I believe you're right. And it's a very beautiful movie, I think. I love the color cinematography. It looks great.
Yeah, makes excellent use of color. And I don't know if that's, I'm not knowledgeable enough about the ins and outs of how color is created to know if it's just like the film stock itself that makes it look the particular way it does. But yeah, it's got the sort of beautiful, like muted tone to it that really fits and helps create the ominous tone of the movie.
Yeah, definitely agree. And I, especially in contrast to Terror of Mechagodzilla, which I feel like was a little bit like dark and gray, and like there didn't seem to be a lot of attention paid to the cinematography in that movie. Like to go from that to this, there are just so many striking, really beautiful shots, which almost look like pastel a little bit, like light yellows and like light greens and stuff like that. It's just a very, very beautiful movie.
And now that we're talking about it, it is like, yeah, Frank, how do they get that color? Because to me, now that we're talking about it, it does have like a very cream tone to it. Like it honestly reminds me of a filter on Instagram or your phone. And I was going through it, well, you can't see it on mine. But yeah, I'm like, oh, there's that filter. That's the Rodan filter. It just gives it that nice wash that it just color films in the 1950s. Just I particularly adore the white. It's just kind of that cream look. I don't know. I'm not very well articulate about it, but I like it too.
I'm looking up a little bit about the technical information about the movie right now. It was filmed in Eastman color, which I know like quite a few other movies had at that time. It was processed in Far East Laboratories in Tokyo, Japan. So I don't know, like if any kind of like combination of just like the processing and like the stock itself, like Frank said, like, yeah, it looks very unique. And I feel like just the convergence of those like technical like specifics really kind of lead to a very distinct look.
Definitely. And coming from Gojira, which was so starkly black and white, which was really shot well in black and white. And then they move into color just as effectively. Pretty cool.
Yeah, very impressive. So this is director Ishiro Honda's personal favorite of his own monster movies, which I thought was kind of interesting. The story is by a novelist named Ken Kuronuma, who was inspired by the death of an American pilot in Kentucky who blacked out and crashed his plane and died while pursuing a UFO in 1948. Interesting tidbit there.
That's crazy.
It probably was not Rodan, but who knows? Maybe it was. We'll never know.
Probably not.
Oh, sorry. Take it away.
I was just gonna say, I was gonna talk about the title of the film. So I don't know if you guys know this, but a trivia about the film is in Japan, it is called The Monster, and the movie is called Rodan. But when it was translated for American release, or at least English language release, it was the translators who switched the A and the O and titled it Rodan. Reasons for that, I don't know how much of this is factual, but radon is a radioactive material, and maybe someone made a decision to lessen the connection to to the radioactive suffering that Americans inflicted on the Japanese. So they were like, let's not connotate that. Let's just change it to something else.
Probably a good idea. Yeah.
And you can still hear it in the film. Some of the characters still refer to the monster as Rodan. You can pick that up.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit more later too, but I think the connection to, the atomic bombings in Japan during World War II by the United States is kind of like evoked in some ways in this movie. Like it's sort of like Gojira. It raises like very kind of striking like parallels to that in sort of unexpected ways. So again, we'll get into that a little bit more later, but I like that you brought that up. It's a very sobering theme.
Yep. Right in line with Honda and Toho's post-war messaging for sure.
Yeah. I have a tendency to get ahead of ourselves. Sorry.
Well, actually, we're looks like themes is the next thing. Did you want to talk about the models and the suits now, or did you want to hold off for anything else? I guess this is where it could fit in.
I feel like we could mention it briefly now.
Okay.
If that works. So yeah, the Rodan creatures were brought to life by a slew of scale flying models and puppets for Rodan's upper half. So that's one of the creatures was portrayed by Haruo Nakajima, as we talked about before. 4 actors inhabited the massive 6-legged Meganudon suit, which looks awesome. I'm sure we'll talk more about that later, but it looks so cool. And whatever actors were inside of there did a fantastic job. And yeah, I guess just the last thing about like the production backstory. This is more a little bit about the reception of the movie, but it did extremely well commercially in Japan and overseas as well in the United States. It grossed an estimated $450,000 to $500,000 during its opening weekend in the United States, and remains, kind of one of the more successful and popular kaiju movies outside of Japan. I think throughout Toho's kind of creation of all these movies. So pretty impressive.
Which again makes it interesting that it didn't sort of spawn more sequels and spin-offs of its own.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. I mean, I wonder if, maybe we'll talk about this more later again, but I wonder if maybe like, after this point, I think in like the early 60s, they started to get maybe a little bit sillier, a little bit campier, and that's not always a bad thing, but I wonder if that's kind of what led to like the lack of Rodan prevalence in later movies, because at least in this case, it's kind of like a stark character.
Yeah. And to what you said earlier, Matt, what more could you do with this character alone, standalone? I think maybe in some ways it was natural that he would just get paired off with Godzilla. Otherwise, he'd probably just be fighting his own monster enemies in his own string of films.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Which would not be a bad thing necessarily.
No, not at all.
Yeah, I guess he's maybe the least like cuddly of the kaijus, I guess. like with like with Godzilla, you could sort of put like a human face to Godzilla a little bit, or kind of ascribe human characteristics to Godzilla a little bit that make it easy to make him like a good guy in future movies and stuff, or to have him team up with people. Whereas Rodan's just kind of a nasty monster. So I guess maybe it's just a more limited character in that way.
That's a great point, Frank, because even this is getting into like what was established in Ghidorah, the 3-headed monster, the personalities of each. And you're right, Godzilla is that human hero. Mothra is all about peace and tranquility, and Rodan is the snarky one in the group. I think even in like Godzilla King of the Monsters, which was from 2019, the new one. The kaiju in that they were not depicted anthropomorphized, but Rodan was still portrayed as like a fire monster, very sharp and gritty, which I think is in line with how we've come to think of the character.
Yeah, and I think sort of like retrospectively, maybe that's what that's what I like about him personally so much. Like he's just mean. There's not like
Yeah.
really like an attempt to like, yeah, like Frank said, like make him like cute and cuddly. Like he's a monster and he's like all about destruction
Yeah.
and that kind of changes in the last couple minutes of the movie, but it's kind of like a refreshing purity almost, or like simplicity, you know? Like I admire the fact that he's just a monster.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in this one though, he's a bit of a lover too. Both of them.
True.
There are two.
Yeah.
What so yeah, what else, Matt, about along these lines?
Well, I think we can move on to the themes unless you guys have anything else to say about the production backstory.
Not me, Frank.
Nope, nothing here.
Cool.
Yeah, did you, I mean, I can start it off, or if you know, if you guys want to bring up any themes that you noticed from the film, you can, you know, take it away if you'd like.
Well,
Yeah.
I could bring up one that comes early on in the movie, are the references to global warming, or the theory of global warming, as one character says near the beginning. I remember when I first saw this back in 2019, that caught my eye right away, because for some reason in my head, I had thought that the whole idea of global warming wasn't really introduced until like the 70s, or it wasn't something that people were noticing was happening until the 70s. And this movie coming out 2 decades earlier, that just kind of caught my attention, because I had no idea that that was something that was a point of discussion at that point.
Agreed. First time I watched this movie, same thing caught my eye, because I was like, oh, it didn't start with Al Gore. Like in my mind, global warming is such a recent thing. And it's like scientists in the 50s were talking about it. Why has this never been addressed then if we've known about it for so long? Yeah, I was blown away by that little detail.
Yeah, me too. Like I feel like you know, a lot of these early kaiju movies, Gojira certainly in this one, like are, you know, the monsters are kind of like symbolic for man's destruction, like the destruction that humans are capable of. And obviously nuclear devastation is a big part of that. But yeah, this movie brings in global warming as well. And you know, I feel like the movie kind of like is a little bit, it seems cynical. Like you know, early on the scientists are saying like, yeah, like if the polar ice caps melt, then the whole world would be flooded and that would be terrible. And then they just like laugh and move on. And that seems like very intentional and very like darkly satirical kind of, you know? And like, you know, now what, like 70 years later, that's even more kind of like infuriating that like, yeah, we've known about this for almost 100 years and all, you know, very little has been done about it. So it's a really
Man.
effective part of this movie's thematic sort of core, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, 70 years later. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's kind of sad.
Yeah.
Very sad.
Yeah.
I think part of that too is like the fact that the Rodans might be awakened by the mining. Like I think it's like black diamond mining, they say at one point in the movie. So I think the movie definitely tries to make a point to say that like, you know, humanity's exploitation of the Earth's like natural resources has kind of like led us to this point. So yeah, like it is like definitely seems very intentional, this like depiction of sort of callous or maybe indifferent humans not really knowing like the negative consequences of like the actions that they have, you know?
Yeah, I think humanity's effect on nature, or relationship with nature, for me is the foremost theme of the movie, with the global warming, with the mining. It's the mining that awakens these creatures. And then at the end, with the creatures' deaths, it's just this sad depiction of humanity's relationship with the natural world.
Yeah, it's you know, like I think this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, the kind of like darker subject matter that the screenwriter Takashi Kimura, the co-writer, you know, I'm assuming that maybe he was responsible for bringing in some of those themes, maybe not, but in any case, this movie, like a lot of other Toho kaiju movies from this era, seems to be a lot more pointed and like pessimistic about humanity's impact on nature.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just gonna add about the miners and the screenwriters' communist affiliations. real quick. So in the beginning of Rodan, there's a couple miners who get into a fight, and there's some sort of conflict there. Apparently, I was just reading about this. There was a miner, a union revolt. I'm not sure the exact details, but there was a worker uprising in that same region of Japan that Rodan is set in. So that could be some recent history that those screenwriters with their socialist leanings are trying to just touch on a little bit.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, I definitely think the movie's trying to pick up on that a little bit. And there's also a shot, or like actually an edit early on in the movie that I think is really interesting too, where we see like a bunch of mine carts kind of like moving like down into the right through the frame as the miners are kind of like trying to figure out what happened when there's this flood early on in the movie. And that shot dissolves to like a moving shot that's like goes over the blueprints in like the engineer's office. So it's like the same kind of camera movement, but it goes from like the lower class workers to like the upper class like engineers who are like away. They're safe. They're not like endangered or anything. They're not in the mines, obviously. So I like that. Just the fact that that dissolve seems like very intentional, and like the same camera movement like seems to contrast like the workers and like their overseers like in a very kind of like yeah, political way. Like these two experiences are like totally separated, you know. Thought it was a fascinating edit. I love that moment.
Nice. I don't want to dominate Frank or Matt if you guys had anything else to add to it.
No, yeah, not much to add to what you guys said about the themes and everything. I think that's all well said.
Nice. There was one more I wanted to touch on. And Matt, looks like in your notes you talked about, of course, the evoking the devastation from World War II on civilians evacuating from the monsters descending onto their cities. That made me remember Shigura's his shell shock, his amnesia. There's a scene where they're showing him pictures. They bring his fiance into the room. They're trying to jog his memory. And Sahara, the performer, it's so captivating, his performance, because he doesn't do anything extra, which as a performer can be so hard to do. Like if Matt or Frank, if I'm like, act like you have amnesia, you lesser, maybe not you guys, but most people might like do silly things like look around the room like, what, where am I? But Sahara just he has a stone face, but you can see just in his eyes that he's lost in his own mind, and it's frightening, honestly. I was like, oh my god, this little performance that I think I mentioned in the Ghidra episode that Honda had been in the Japanese Imperial Army himself in the 30s. So as a soldier, he probably saw that firsthand, that sort of PTSD shell shock look. And I just thought was a very a nice moment that I wanted to call out.
Yeah, definitely the best performance in the movie, at least the best performance of someone playing a human, for sure. He's very good in it, especially in that scene that you mentioned.
Yeah, there's kind of a touching moment when Kyo, his fiance, comes in and he doesn't seem to recognize her at all, or maybe he does, but he can't quite place her, it's really effective. And again, I think like kind of like the love story between them, even though it's not really touched on all that much. And then the I don't know, relationship seems like a strong word, but like the two Rodan creatures and how they kind of go down in flames together. Like I just feel like pairing the human story and the Rodan story works pretty well. It makes it a little bit more emotional than I thought it would be.
Yeah, there's a lot of care taken in those emotional moments. I guess I'll credit Honda for that, for being the director. that I think elevates this movie above just a run-of-the-mill monster movie.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, that's all I have for themes.
Yeah, and that's, it's I admire like the what's the word, the thematic ambition of this movie, which again, like that's a big part of Gojira and why I love Gojira so much, and crops up in some of the other kaiju movies. But yeah, it's very prevalent in this one, and it works really well.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you guys are good, we can move on to form and aesthetic.
Let's do it.
Cool. I'll let you guys. I'll hear what you have to say first.
Well, I know we already touched on the the beautiful cinematography and everything too. I wanted to say also that the sets in the movie are really well done. Like especially the flooded mine shaft. I think there's a kind of set piece fairly early on in the movie where there's already been some attacks and they're just kind of trying to figure out what's going on, and some of the miners are going back into the flooded area of the mine shaft, and that's a really tense and creepy scene, I think, largely because of that setting, and just a great sequence. And also some of the things like the kind of the caved in area where you see the Rodan hatch in the flashback later on, and everything is another really great set too. Just very good production design in this movie.
Yeah, in that scene, I love how it plays with scale with the hatchling Rodan, and then you see it picking up the Meganulon larva, and it's eating them, and then you go, oh my god, this Rodan baby is enormous. Because in the previous scene, the Meganulon, we're on Sahara's level, so they were huge. Now they're on Rodan's level and they're tiny. I just thought that was really effective.
That's such a great way of elevating the stakes too, because it's like we've already seen the devastation that the Meganulon can cause early on in the movie, and now you're seeing like, oh my god, this thing is eating those.
Yeah, there's something bigger.
Yeah, and so like you said, to get the scale of that is just a great visual representation of that, and like now it's everything's gone crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like there's another good example of that, and it's kind of like more model sets than like human size sets, but still obviously related to set design. But excuse me, it's the moment when like there's an earthquake, which is supposed to be like kind of like a mild earthquake, but like we see the earth kind of like implode on itself. It's a really gorgeous moment and like kind of scary because it's we don't know what's going on obviously, and it's like supposed to be like a Richter scale 0, like the earthquake expert is like, oh, it's a very minor earthquake, but suddenly we see like just like these fields just like get sucked up, and it's like, yeah, you realize the scope of it, you realize that something weird is going on even though we don't know exactly what it is yet, and it's a great way to build suspense early on.
Yeah, those fields collapsing in on themselves, I agree, those are very impressive models, I suppose, or special effects. I wanted to talk about Ishiro Honda's, the camera work. So whoever was behind the camera, but it's something I noticed in all of Honda's movies. It's very dynamic. The camera moves a lot. Of course, he has static shots, but there's a lot of pans on crowds. There's just a lot of like zooming in for this dramatic heightened effect of terror. It's not often that I actually pay attention to the way the camera moves when I watch a movie. It's a habit I'm trying to get more into. But man, Honda's camera moves and it's awesome.
Yeah, totally. There's a cool shot where it's like outside of like a window outside of the engineer's office, and it's like kind of moving laterally through like several different rooms, and I think it's like the engineers and some journalists are trying to like figure out what's going on. There's a lot of chaos and kind of just like a lot of commotion, and this shot just like moves laterally from left to right from like one space to the next. It's a really striking moment, and probably took like a lot of time and a lot of planning to set up, but it's very effective.
Yeah. Yeah, just one more example of heightening this film, just elevating it a little bit more. It looks like the movie also makes, this is fun. This is I think where some campy elements come into the film. Shock, like the use of jolt or shock with the sudden appearance of a mega nulon. Like you're not expecting it. I guess a jump scare in modern vocabulary, but yeah, it's just like, oh shoot, there's a giant bug monster right there in the wall, which is fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and the way it comes into the movie is so great too, because up till that point you really haven't seen a monster or anything. They do a lot with just kind of building tension with with just kind of hinting at what might be happening and just kind of giving you like these creepy things happening in dark shadows or just out of frame or whatever. And then yeah, all of a sudden this giant like centipede type creature is just bursting through the doors of these people's home.
Yeah, that's such an awesome moment. I love that when we first see the monster and it's like, yeah, in this domestic space where we like least expect it. It's so effective. I love it.
Yeah, and Frank, I'm glad you brought up the mystery aspects leading up to the reveal of our first monster, at least. And that's what I love about this movie. Like you have the kaiju action towards the end with the Rodans, but in the beginning, it's very it's a mystery. It's a murder mystery at first. The clues slowly unfold and build upon each other. So then when you get to the Mega Nulon and then you get to Rodan, it's like, wait, where did we start? What a thrill ride, really. A slow burn to get to the monster action that we expect and we do get.
Yeah, and I feel like the Rodan hatching sequence is a really good example of that too, because Shigeru can't remember what happened, and then in the hospital room, Kyo shows him like these eggs that her pet birds have lain, and that like conjures his memory, and there's this incredible scene, I love it, where he flashes back to when he's in the cave and he sees Rodan hatch from the egg, one of the Rodans. And it's both a good example of like the jolt or the shock, because we've seen like bits and pieces of Rodan during some of the like aerial combat scenes where some of the planes are knocked down, but not really very well. So like this is the first time that we get a good look at this monster, and it just like emerges from this shell. It's really effective, and also it's a good example too of what you were talking about, Vincent, like the camera movement, because there's the character of Shigeru and like the camera sort of like zooms up to him very quickly, or maybe tracks up to him. I think it might be a tracking shot, but in any case, like it definitely conveys like obviously his shock at seeing this happen, and even like the shock of him like recovering this memory a little bit.
Yes,
great scene. I love it.
I'm gonna talk about that scene, how I feel about that scene in my good breakdown, because
I didn't mean to take away your thunder. Sorry.
No, it's we can have a whole, I could talk about that one scene for 50 minutes.
Incredible. Yeah. I guess one other thing. Oh, sorry.
No, I had nothing.
Well, just one other thing I wanted to mention in the form aesthetic category is just that this is such like a tightly constructed movie. Like the plot really is all about the Rodan creatures, and like even the human stuff is like totally focused on that. It's pretty much all about the miners that are killed by the Rodan creatures or like the Meganulons, which I think is in contrast to some of the other kaiju movies where the humans have their own subplots, which maybe is not super interesting sometimes. So I just wanted to bring that up because this movie is totally focused on Rodan, on those two creatures, and there's really not like an excess or like filler moment in the entire thing, in my opinion. Maybe a few here and there.
Yeah, that's one thing I really like about this movie in comparison to a lot of other kaiju movies is there's really no, there's no distractions from the matter at hand, really. So, which helps keep that sense of urgency up, but also just there's no aliens, there's no like I don't know, there's no like cute stuff in it for kids or whatever. It's just
Right.
it's all very focused. And I think also by just not having anything there for kids or any like silly stuff or whatever. It kind of doesn't it doesn't dissipate the weirdness the way it does, I think, in some other kaiju movies. Like the more serious tone, the fact that it has a more serious tone, you know, while still being something where you've got guys in rubber suits and everything, makes it, to me, more bizarre and more surreal and more interesting than it does if it's just a thing that's supposed to be like silly and fun, which, you know, some other movies in the genre are.
I totally agree. I think it's that contrast between the bizarre and the seriousness of the other elements, and that line can get blurred in, like, you know, in other kaiju films. But in this, it's like we have our I'm blanking on the maybe the literary term, but we have our established world, and it gets turned on its head by these bizarre elements. The ordinary world. That's it.
Yeah, you know, like I do like Ghidorah. We were talking about this before a little bit, and I find like the human subplots like pretty amusing and like very like I'm glad they exist in that movie. But I think like yeah, like this and Ghidorah are like maybe equally good in my opinion, but in like completely different ways, you know? This movie's trying to do something totally different than that movie's trying to do.
Yeah. And I think Honda does both. He plays very well in both sandboxes.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. If you guys are good just going to our breakdowns, I think we're coming up on our hour mark. So yeah, I'm cool to get there and hear some what the good, the bad, and the downright campy.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Cool. I can start. Yeah, I love the sense of okay, two things. I really love the beginning of this movie when we're establishing this mystery, and that mystery is enhanced by Ifukube's score, which is unlike any other score I've heard of his. It's very foreboding and tense and eerie, and it adds a lot to that sense of, well, foreboding, really. And then I do love the cave scene with Rodan. That whole scene when Shigura is seeing the hatchling, the way it's framed and the way it's shot, there's like even like a wind effect, like blowing his hair a little bit. It's so epic and terrifying that it's just it's one of the most incredible, personally, it's one of the most incredible scenes I've ever seen in any movie. I'm just like, from Rodan, but yeah, that's it for me. Also real quick, I love that the movie just kind of reminded me, this time I watched it, it reminded me with the UFO, the UFO stuff. It did remind me of American movies at the time, science fiction creature feature films, which played in the UFO alien stuff. So I was like, oh, that's a nice little 1950s convention that we're getting into. Okay, I'm done. For my good.
Yeah, for me, as far as the good, I mean, we've already talked about the great pacing and the plotting and the great production values and everything. I would say too, just how like genuinely eerie the movie is. I think is really impressive. Like we were talking about, I mean, even before the monsters show up, just like, you know, when they're going into those mine shafts, you know, gives you that great, you know, don't go in there type of feeling that you want to get out of horror movies every once in a while. So that aspect of it's great. And yeah, there's a number of really good set pieces in here. I mean, I agree with you, Vincent, that the highlight is the Rodan hatching sequence. And that kind of reminds me a little bit of the, you know, there's the famous scene in the original version of The Fly, the 1950s version, right at the end with the protagonist being caught in that spider's web, and the help me sequence. And it's just that's similar kind of just like nightmare of no longer being at the top of the food chain, and just being totally helpless.
Yeah.
And that's just such a great version of that type of scene. And again, the thing with the Mega Nulon going crazy early on, and just just causing complete chaos, I think is it's a great sequence too. And even the big kind of kaiju moments toward the end, where the Rodans are they've gone into Fukuoka and they're attacking the city and getting attacked by the tanks and everything, and everything is smoky, and from all of the gunpowder or whatever, is just a great version of that type of sequence as well. So just really great big set pieces in this movie.
Yeah, totally agree. I love the connection with the fly. That's an awesome comparison, and didn't really think about that, but that is totally true. I love that as well. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what both of you already said. I would add like the scenes of like aerial combat, maybe a little bit dated in a way, but in like a really beautiful sort of like very careful and like carefully crafted way. Like the scenes where the pilots are like trying to follow Rodan and they're like flying in its contrails, like it's sort of like jet stream or whatever, just unexpectedly very beautiful. Love the sort of destruction scenes like you talked about, Frank. And yeah, just like it's a very entertaining movie, but also like the seriousness of it, and the sort of the fact that it's like clearly a product of its time and place, like it's trying to deal with like human anxieties and like concerns in the immediate post-war era, especially in Japan, is really admirable. And it does that while also sort of crafting this extremely intense and eerie monster movie. It's very impressive.
It does so many things so well together. It's hard it was hard finding some bad things for me, some things that didn't work. I'm really nitpicking here. Like you say, Matt, with I agree that the aerial footage, he like the editing or whoever, they combine like clearly like real footage, like aerial footage, with clear props, airplane props against a blue backdrop.
Mhm.
And it works really well for me. With that said, yeah, you can see strings. You can tell that the cardboard props are a little too stiff. But whatever, like it's still done really well in my opinion. With that said, I think the Mega Nulon creatures, as well crafted as those costumes are, they do come off rather silly for me, even though these are scary scenes. Maybe they're supposed to be a little campy. I found it a little campy. And there were some editing things in the beginning, like some rough editing, not even just transitions, like within one scene, like you would see a little jump cut or something that's like, oh, maybe they were just trying to fix a mistake or something. But that's it.
Yeah,
I mean,
the one thing I had for the bad is that I feel like the revelation that there's a second Rodan should be a little more dramatic or really a lot more dramatic than it is in the movie, because the way it comes up is just kind of like, oh, there's a second one now. And it feels like there should be, it almost feels like there's like a scene missing or something where, I don't know how they would establish this, but maybe like, okay, maybe they shoot the one down and the humans think that they've won or something, and then the second one pops up or something. Because the way it plays out is just kind of the second one just sort of shows up in the middle of the big battle toward the end, and then they're just like, oh, there's a second one, and it just feels a little undramatic for what that should be, and in what I think is otherwise a very well plotted and well structured movie.
yeah, fair.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't really have very much in the bad category either. It's hard to think of stuff to talk about here. I think I could almost use a little bit more of the destruction sequences, and that's like maybe a good and a bad thing, because that's not really like the main focus of the movie. Like I feel like the payoff of like really only having the one scene in Fukuoka where like just it's chaos and like everything is destroyed. Like I feel like the movie kind of prioritizes the early scenes, which is almost more of like a horror movie where
Mhm.
you know there are these giant worms and like there's so much building of dread and suspense. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that there aren't more destruction sequences, but like how amazing that single scene is that single scene is in this movie, sorry, makes me kind of want more of that, you know. But
Yeah.
then at the same time, it probably would be a little bit like excessive and would like sort of mess with the pacing of the movie a little bit. So
Which I think is the thing with movies that are as tightly constructed as Rodan. Sometimes it's maybe a little too quick in its pacing. You know what I mean?
yeah, like
Yeah.
you could destroy one more city, you know, I'd be okay with that.
We're not gonna not like the movie if you destroy one more city.
Exactly, yeah. But I mean, it's like you said, Vincent, that's very, very nitpicky and probably actually a good thing, even though it's in my bad category. So it's hard to
Right.
find stuff
Yeah.
in that regard.
Um, for, campy was actually even harder for me to figure out because this movie, because I like to find the moments of intentional camp. Like I find the Mega Nulon campy, but I don't think they were intended to be campy. If that makes sense. So all that to say is there's a scene with there's like a newlywed couple and they are taking a drive on their honeymoon to Mount Aso. I don't know why that's where they go for their honeymoon, but it sets them up perfectly to get killed by a Rodan. So that scene I think is meant to be a little incredulous. Like, what are they doing?
Yeah, like going to the crater of like a maybe soon to erupt volcano probably is not the best thing to do on your honeymoon.
Right. That was good for me.
Makes for some good wedding pictures, though, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, for this section, I just had that the tanks toward the end are like extremely fake looking, like, which it's not really a bad thing. It's you know, charming in a way and doesn't really take away from those last scenes, in my opinion. But it's like very clear that they just went to like the toy store and bought some toy tanks there.
Yeah, and painted the Japanese flag on them. I noticed that too.
Yeah. 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 Also, I know you guys said that you like the flight sequences, and I don't think they're horrible or anything, but Rodan's flight, like the way that Rodan actually flies around, is pretty like stiff and silly looking too, I think.
Yeah, no,
But
you're not
again,
wrong.
okay.
Yeah, no, it's very true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's you know, like I feel like I like the moments where it seems to be like stock footage of like, you know, like an airplane flying around that's like intercut with that. Like that's the stuff that I
Yeah.
like, and I feel like
Yeah.
like the attack scenes are a little bit more obviously fake and campy. But even those are kind of fun, I think.
There's a scene where people are on a bridge and there's like a tour guide going on. Remember like when Rodan destroys the bridge? The tour guide is like, everyone get off the bridge. Like
When
they can't, like there's a giant monster coming our way. And then everyone screams and does the classic running for their lives.
you would think they would notice beforehand. Yeah.
Yeah, like a bridge isn't where you want to be in a situation like this.
I would just add one campy moment, which is sort of close to the beginning when like 3 or 4 miners are like going into the flooded mine to figure out what's going on. And one of them dies and they're like sort of dragged underwater, but they're
Yeah,
not really dragged. They sort of just like slowly kind of like sink underwater while they're screaming in a very like not, you know, unconvincing way.
that's true.
That's the campiest moment to me.
Yeah, good point.
I
Okay, so
agree, although I do think that scene is like genuinely creepy at the same time. Maybe it's just my own fear of being like dragged underwater by something I can't see or something. but yeah, his acting is a little bit silly in that moment.
It is a very effective and very creepy scene. I agree with you there, but
it's almost disconcerting how how campily, to coin a term, he is dragged under the water because the scene is so creepy. That
Right.
is this juxtaposition that is a little unsettling.
Maybe that just adds to the the disconcerting nature of it. Who knows?
Yeah. Okay, so I guess there's more campy things than I thought there would be.
But not a lot. I mean, the camp value is like fairly minimum in this movie, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. So with that, I'm ready to get to our final evaluations. Matt, do you want to do your favorite part?
Sure. Yeah. So our categories are: it's a timeless classic. It definitely stands the test of time. Below that, we have there may be some antiquated moments, but overall it's great and does stand the test of time. Thirdly, we have it may be historically significant or just fun, but does not stand the test of time. And last and least, it is not worth revisiting. It definitely does not stand the test of time.
All right, Frank, you get to go first.
Well, yeah, I'm gonna give it the highest rating. The timeless classic stands the test of time. I mean, like I kind of said at the top, but you know, I'd put this right up there with Godzilla and the original Godzilla and original King Kong as far as giant monster movies go. I think it's right up there with those. So it's definitely one of my favorites in the genre.
Yeah, well said. I also think it's a classic. I think it stands the test of time. I think I think its themes of global warming and are so ahead of its time, and that message is conveyed through such disconcerting dread and horror, and coupled with Sahara's performance. I think you could watch this movie time and time again and never get tired of it.
Yeah, totally agree. This is the first time that three of us all are going to give this the highest rating. It's a timeless classic. It's an amazing movie. It's also one of my favorites that I've seen in the kaiju genre. Yeah, and in a nutshell, I would just say like the fact that it's able to make such a creepy, truly suspenseful horror / monster movie while still conveying some pretty fascinating and pretty serious minded themes is really impressive. Great work by pretty much everybody involved with this movie. Yeah, one of the best that we've talked about so far.
Yeah, and great work to us tonight. That was great. Great conversation. Thank you all for hanging out with us. You can follow Camp Kaiju wherever you podcast, Instagram. We have a website, Camp Kaiju Monster Movie Reviews. Yes, so Matt and I and maybe some other people are typing up some reviews of other monster movies we've been watching. And we're gearing up for next month. We have a couple movies lined up. Matt, do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, well, I know Frank will be joining us at the end of August for Shin Godzilla, which I'm very excited about. I have never seen that before. Sounds great. Frank, did you want to say anything about that as sort of like a preview?
Yeah, just that was one I actually hadn't heard of until all of a sudden my brother asked me if I wanted to go see it, and it had like a one night screening in Milwaukee. We went to see it, and it was really cool, really interesting movie, kind of an interesting throwback to the old Toho style, even though it's a newer movie.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm very excited about that.
You're in for a treat. I think just as good as Shin Godzilla will be our next episode. We are featuring the 1995 90s classic Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie, with guest host Armando Rivera. If he's listening to this, you better not back out, because now it's official. It's gonna be a good campy time.
It's a guest star studded August.
Yeah, guest star studded August. That's the theme for the next month.
I know coming up soon, we're also probably going to be talking about Prey, the newest movie in the Predator sort of canon.
Yep.
And might be talking about some of the other Predator movies as well. Most likely in September. So that'll be coming up at some point. Lots of other good stuff to come as well.
And then it's Halloween. And then who knows what we're going to talk about. 'Tis the season for monsters.
I can't wait. Possibilities are endless.
Lots of good things coming up, everybody. Thank you. Frank, thank you so much. We'll see you next month. How exciting.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Frank.
All right. Take care, guys.
Bye.